In part 2 of our recap of the mainline Resident Evil games, we spoke about the events of Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1, about the excursions of the Bravo and Alpha teams of the STARS unit into the Arklay Mountains across both games. In part 3, we'll be moving into Raccoon City proper, as we recount the events of Resident Evil 2. Things have never really been on track when you look at the bigger picture, ever since the 3 founders of Umbrella got their hands on the flower that gave birth to the progenitor virus. But while till now their exploits have only had relatively small-scale effects in the outskirts of Raccoon City, the events of Resident Evil 2 are when things really start getting out of hand on a larger scale. But before we get into the immediate events of Resident Evil 2, it's important to take a look at some very important things that happened beforehand, after the events of the first Resident Evil. These events revolve around a single character that we've spoken of quite a bit up until now, but whose actions will go on to spell dire consequences for an entire city. That man, of course, is William Birkin. As you might remember, when Wesker made Birkin the offer to defect from Umbrella and instead join their rival corporation, Birkin turned him down, instead wanting to stay at Nest, the lab beneath Raccoon City that Spencer had funded and built for him, so that he could complete his work on the G-Virus, which up until now had proven to be the most advanced and as such the deadliest rendition of what had originally started out as just an innocent little flower in West Africa. And after the events of Resident Evil 0 and 1, that is where Birkin still remains. Alongside his wife and fellow brilliant scientist Annette Birkin, he leads up Nest as the duo and the people working under them continue to make strides in their research, developing G-Virus further and further and further, without any regard for the consequences their work might lead to. But once their work has progressed enough, Birkin decides to use it for his own gains. Obviously, he had no loyalty to Umbrella, and only wanted to use the resources they offered to help him complete his work on G. And once that work was close to completion, Birkin contacted the United States military, telling them that he would go rogue and sell the virus to them for a hefty price. The military naturally agrees, seeing huge potential in how they could weaponize the virus. But Umbrella, too, catches wind of Birkin's exploits. They try to shut him down, and when Birkin refuses to allow them access to Nest, the corporation decides to take extreme measures in order to keep their property, the G-Virus, safe in their own hands. What do? They send a squad of the USS, the Umbrella Security Services, led by an enigmatic and mysterious operative called Hunk, to bring Birkin in alive and acquire the virus from him. Things, as you may have guessed, don't go as planned. Hunk's squad enters Nest and makes its way to its target, but William Birkin refuses to go down without a fight. He tells them that the G-Virus is his life's work, and things begin heating up. One of the USS operatives has a particularly itchy trigger finger, and believing that Birkin is making a move to attack them, fires several shots into the man. Birkin drops to the ground, ridden with bullet wounds, and the USS squad picks up his G-Virus samples and leaves. But again, Birkin is not gonna go down without a fight. He takes another sample of the G-Virus and injects himself with it, to not only ensure that he doesn't succumb to his wounds and die, but also that he can become strong enough to take out the USS operatives who stole his virus from him. But just as he does so, Annette Birkin walks in. Horrified at what she has witnessed and what her husband has done, she pulls a gun on him, wanting to put him down before the virus's transformation can take over. But of course, she can't do it. She's his wife after all. All that is pretty important setup for other things that go down in Resident Evil 2, so keep that in mind as we move forward. But before we move away from William Birkin and enter the midwestern town of Raccoon City, let's stay in this pivotal moment just a while longer and talk about something hugely important. There's a lot that goes on with Birkin, Annette, and the people around them in Resident Evil 2, but one of the first things William does after he injects himself with the virus is track down the USS squad. Empowered, twisted, and turned by the transformation of the G-Virus, Birkin is constantly losing himself at a rapid rate, but he does have superhuman strength too. He finds the USS operatives in the sewers beneath Raccoon City, and when he does, he makes short work of them. Well, all except Hunk, their leader, who manages to escape. When he decimates the USS squad, one of the soldiers carrying the case with the G-Virus in it does something that goes on to spell disastrous consequences. He drops the case. The vial breaks, the virus pours to the floor, and rats in the sewers come in contact with it, becoming the carriers of this deadly, terrifying contagion. Throughout the history of humankind, rats rats have been carriers of some of the most deadly plagues and diseases known to our species, so it's grimly fitting that it's with rats that the G-Virus goes from being contained in a single vial to rapidly spreading throughout an entire city, because that is exactly what it does. The outbreak hits Raccoon City hard, and most if not all of the population is affected by it one way or another. And now we turn our attention to the events of Resident Evil 2 proper, where we put the spotlight on both of its protagonists, rookie police officer Leon S. Kennedy and fiery college student Claire Redfield. When we say Leon Kennedy is a rookie police officer of the Raccoon City Police Department, or the RPD, we mean really rookie, as in he just got the job. When Resident Evil 2 begins, he's reporting for literally his first day on duty, and Claire, as her name might have given away, she's the sister of Chris Redfield, who, as you might remember, is a STARS agent. When news breaks out of the outbreak in Raccoon City, both Leon and Claire arrive in town for different reasons. Leon, who had been told to stay away by the senior cops earlier, comes in because he feels his fellow officers might need him in this time of crisis, which is putting it mildly. Meanwhile, Claire finds out about the outbreak and decides to go to the city to find her brother, make sure he's safe and alive, and then leave town with him. Right at the beginning of Resident Evil 2, the paths of Leon and Claire collide. Happenstance finds them both in the same place, where the two of them are attacked by large numbers of zombies. They manage to escape, and forced together because of the circumstances as they are, get into a car and drive away. Realizing that they're both headed to the police station, Leon because he's a cop and Claire because she's looking for Chris, they decide to accompany each other. But soon they're forced to part ways once again when a truck driver, delirious because of a zombie having bitten him earlier, crashes into them. Eventually, they both make it to the police station separately, and both Leon and Claire then spend a very eventful and terrifying night in Raccoon City. The RPD, an old building that once used to be a museum, had become a last line of defense of sorts for the denizens of the city. As the outbreak spread and the city started falling, the RPD became a refuge for the survivors. Here, they locked themselves in, hoping to survive and make it to whenever it was that someone sent rescue, or any form of aid if that ever happened. The station, however, started running low on things like food, while the zombies started piling up outside, eventually trapping the survivors inside. Tensions obviously arose, and things, as you might expect, did not go well for the people inside. By the time Leon and Claire get to the station, there's next to no one left alive. Now, because of the inconsistencies between the two campaigns of the Resident Evil 2 remake, it's a little hard to put the pieces of the chronology of events into place. Who meets whom, who goes where first, stuff like that. So we'll most likely be going over the main talking points here. But we'd be remiss not to mention Marvin Branagh, a police officer who had a small role in the original Resident Evil 2, which was largely expanded in the remake. Marvin helps out Claire and/or Leon when they make it into the police station in their efforts to find another way out, but eventually succumbs to a zombie bite. In the station, Claire doesn't find Chris, but she does find out where he is, in Europe. She finds a letter written by him to his fellow STARS members, and though it might seem like a regular letter checking in on his friends written while he was on vacation, what it essentially is code. Because the real reason Chris is in Europe is that he's been tracking down Umbrella since the events of Resident Evil 1, and has traveled to Europe to dismantle their operations. This will come into play later on, so file this away for now. Some other important details also come to light. For instance, Irons, the chief of Raccoon City's police, isn't exactly the man you'd want leading the city's PD. Why? Because he, as it turns out, has been in Umbrella's pocket. More specifically, he's been in William Birkin's pocket, who's been paying him to enable Umbrella's research and to keep silent about their illegal activities. Irons, in fact, also had a hand in making sure that Umbrella was able to construct nests right underneath Raccoon City quietly. And he does some other stuff too. We'll get to that in just a bit. Because for now, there's some other far more dangerous things walking around RPD, like a tyrant. The Tyrant. The one Resident Evil fans immediately think of as soon as they think of these hulking bioorganic super soldiers created by Umbrella, Mr. X. The role of Mr. X is slightly different in the remake from his role in the original. For starters, in the original Resident Evil 2, Umbrella actually set in multiple tyrants, while in the remake there's only one. Additionally, Mr. X's mission in the original was to retrieve a certain pendant from a certain somebody, which we'll get to shortly. While in the remake, his mission is plain plain and simple, to hunt down and kill any survivors in Raccoon City in order to erase any evidence or witnesses that can attest to Umbrella's wrongdoings. In the RPD then, as Leon and Claire are looking for a way out, they're constantly being stalked by Mr. X, but the two of them also meet some other people who prove to be instrumental to both their stories. Let's start with Claire, who comes across a young girl named Sherry, who is far more important than you'd initially think. Sherry, you see, is actually Sherry Birkin, the daughter of William and Annette Birkin. There's a lot going on with Sherry. For starters, she's being hunted by William Birkin. Why is she being hunted by her own father, though? Well, because by this point, William Birkin is barely even her father anymore. Ever since he injected himself and throughout the entirety of Resident Evil 2, the G-Virus continues to grow and mutate in his body, taking over all his functions and essentially turning him into nothing more than a shell of a host, to the point where though the body is clearly that of William Birkin's, the thing inside is whatever the virus's transformation has created. And the virus, you see, is always looking to replicate, which is a complicated process because not everybody can be a perfect host body, and more often than not, the virus can end up rejecting a host by killing it. Since William Birkin turned out to be a successful host though, so too can his daughter, thanks to their shared DNA, and since the G-monster wants to replicate, it wants to infect Sherry. Sherry, incidentally, also wears a pendant around her neck, which was given to her by her mother, and is quite important as you might have guessed. In the original Resident Evil 2, the pendant contained a sample of the G-Virus, which is what Mr. X had been tasked with retrieving. In the remake, we'll get to it. So yeah, that's who Claire meets. She meets Sherry, terrified and alone, and tells her she'll help her find her mother, not knowing yet that her mother is Annette Birkin. But who does Leon meet? Someone equally interesting. Leo meets the enigmatic Ada Wong. Ada is an undercover mercenary who's been tasked with retrieving a sample of the G-Virus by any means necessary by none other than Albert Wesker himself. Though, of course, that's completely hush-hush. Obviously, though, that's not what she tells Leon, and has a completely different story ready for who she is, which also varies depending on whether it's the original RE2 we're talking about or the remake. In the original Resident Evil 2, Ada claims to be looking for her boyfriend, who she claims is a researcher at Umbrella. Meanwhile, in the remake, she tells Leon she's an FBI agent who's been investigating Umbrella for months, and is on a mission to finally take them down. Being the naive rookie that he is, for now anyway, Leon believes her, and tells her he'll help her in her mission. Oh, poor Leon, you sweet summer child. Meanwhile, Claire and Sherry encounter Chief Irons. Yeah, that guy. Irons holds Claire at gunpoint, ties her up, and then takes Sherry away. In the struggle, Sherry drops her pendant, which Claire retrieves, now determined to track Irons down and rescue Sherry. While she's looking for a way out of the station, she's contacted by Irons, who, as it turns out, needs the pendant. He tells Claire to bring the pendant to him at the orphanage a few blocks away from the station, which is an area and plot point that is completely new in the remake. The orphanage, you see, is not really an orphanage at all. It's a front, set up by Umbrella with the help of Chief Irons, which Umbrella uses to further its own machinations. How? Well, they use the children in the orphanage as test subjects for their experiments. Claire manages to find a way out of the station and makes her way to the orphanage, where she finds out that Birkin, now even more twisted by the virus than before, implanted a G-Virus embryo in the police chief. Irons, however, proves to be a bad match for a host body and ends up being killed by the G-Virus mutant inside him. Claire finds Sherry, and this is where their story moves into the sewers underneath Raccoon City. But wait, Leon and Ada's story moves to the sewers as well. After Leon tells Ada that he'll help her dismantle Umbrella and retrieve the virus from them, Ada tells him about their lab beneath the city, with the only way to get to it being through the sewers. Being the place where the outbreak originated, you can probably imagine what the sewers are like. Not very pleasant, even by sewer standards. Here, Leon and Ada are confronted by Annette. To put it concisely, after a series of events, Ada is grievously injured, and though Leon manages to rescue her, she tells him that her wound won't allow her to carry on. She asks Leon to go to Nest to retrieve the virus in her place, and being the naive rookie that he is, he agrees. And so he gets on a tram built by Umbrella in the sewers, which leads straight to their lab. As you might have guessed, Claire and Sherry also wind up in Nest. So what happens to them in the sewers? As it turns out, the monster known as G, who once used to be William Birkin successfully implanted a virus in Sherry, and Sherry is sick, and getting sicker by the minute. Claire also encounters Annette here, and after an argument between the two about how crappy Annette is at parenting, Annette tells her to take Sherry to Nest, where she can find a vaccine for the virus. Sherry's pendant, by the way, is literally a key which can grant access to where the vaccine is kept, in the remake that is. And now we move into the final phase of Resident Evil 2's story, as all major players find themselves in Nest, the birthplace of the deadly G-Virus. Here, major revelations come to light, before some final confrontations against terrifying monstrosities take place. For starters, Leon finds out thanks to Annette that Ada isn't who she says she is at all, that she's actually a mercenary who's been paid by one of Umbrella's rivals to steal the G-Virus. Leon manages to recover a sample of the virus, but as soon as he does, the lab's security protocols kick in. And you know what that means. A self-destruct sequence is initiated. In the midst of explosions that are causing the lab to literally fall apart, Leon confronts Ada, asking her if what Annette told him is true. In response, Ada simply pulls a gun on him, telling him to hand over the virus. Leon, ever the model for doing what's right, refuses to do so, telling Ada that she's gonna have to kill him if she wants the virus. But of course, Ada doesn't do it. Before anyone else can make another move, a shot rings out, burying itself straight into Ada, shot by Annette Birkin in the background, who only wants for the virus which she helped create to not fall into the wrong hands. Believing Ada to be dead, though of course she isn't really dead, Leon makes his way out of the lab even as it crumbles around him. But of course he has one final obstacle to face: Mr. X, who by now has transformed and mutated into a super tyrant. After a grueling fight, Leon is finally able to kill the unkillable, and Mr. X, who has refused to die no matter what you throw at him, finally dies. In the remake, Mr. X dies in both campaigns, and dies in different ways, but since his fight against Leon as the super tyrant is what is shown in the original, let's just go with that. At the same time, Claire explores Nest as she looks for a cure to heal Sherry, and ultimately recovers it, but she faces her own hurdles as well. She is attacked by G, aka Birkin, who is now a full-blown monstrosity, with barely any hints left of the human he used to be. Claire, too, is involved in a heated and deadly fight of her own, and with the help of Annette, she succeeds in finally killing Birkin. Before dying, though, he's able to deliver a deadly blow to his wife, and the wound she incurs soon ends up killing her, though in the remake, she does get a final moment of goodbye with her daughter right as Claire gives her the vaccine and cures her. Both Leon and Claire meet up at last, finding a train that proves to be the only way out of the lab. And a way out is what they need desperately, considering the fact that the lab is moments away from being destroyed, and burying them alive in its ruins. But of course it's not over yet. As Leon, Claire, and Sherry get aboard the train, they face one final challenge. William Birkin ain't dead yet. The monster known as G has now fully taken over, spreading outward with hideous growths to turn into absolute nightmare fuel, large enough to devour the train they're on whole. Leon or Claire, depending on the order you played the campaign in, face off against G one final time, and are able to finally, once and for all, for real this time, I promise, kill it. Leon, Claire, and Sherry make it out, finally, ending their night of terrors in Raccoon City, having become determined to look for the people responsible and make sure that Umbrella's machinations are brought to an end. These events, as you may have guessed, lead directly into Code Veronica, and this is where we're gonna end part 3, though this is leading directly into the beginning of Code Veronica. Well, almost directly. There is one other game that we have to talk about before we get to it, which is what we'll be covering in part 4. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, please hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to switch on the notifications bell icon next to it. That way you'll never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.